February 2012. A heavy atmosphere hung over the abandoned concrete slab that had once been the storage area of the Lantern Café. Less than a mile outside Riverton, Kansas, the beam from structural engineer Mark Delaney's flashlight cut through the haze of dust, illuminating deep cracks that had just appeared after the drill's powerful impact. "Control, I need police and forensics here immediately. We've found something that doesn't belong on this job." His voice echoed across the cold, empty lot, carrying an unease he couldn't hide. What began as a simple concrete renovation job had just turned into something else entirely, something that might finally answer the question that had haunted Riverton for 54 years. Buried deep inside the cement were fragments of human bone, sealed in as though entombed alive in time. Right beside them, they found a woman's Belova watch, its hands frozen at 9:57 p.m., the exact model Lillian Weaver had been wearing the night she vanished in 1958. For more than half a century, the disappearance of Lillian Weaver had been nothing more than dusty case files. A vibrant young woman last seen walking toward the back of the diner after her evening shift. A family with an empty chair that would never be filled at the dinner table. A bedroom her mother refused to ever lock again. Before we continue this shocking story, please take a second to hit subscribe and like the video. Your support helps bring forgotten stories back into the light and make sure you never miss another historical case in the future. Because finding those remains under the concrete wasn't just the end of a missing person case, it was the first domino in a chain of events that would unearth secrets Riverton had kept buried for decades. When authorities revisited the files, they discovered a receipt for 15 bags of cement, signed just 2 days after Lillian went missing, signed by H. Weaver. And when they tracked down that man in 2012, he wasn't some drifter or nameless predator. He was someone Riverton knew. Someone they trusted. Someone who had lived among them for more than half a century, carrying a horrific secret. The Weaver case isn't just a mystery solved. It's proof of the persistence of investigators who refused to let files gather dust, and of the advancement of forensic science in giving voice back to victims silenced long ago. It's also the story of a divided community. In 1958, suspicion spread through Riverton like wildfire. Neighbors eyed one another warily. Families avoided even saying Lillian's name. Those simmering cracks were just waiting for the truth to explode and reveal them. What makes this case especially haunting is that the answer was always so close. The prime suspect had been interviewed once, but slipped through the cracks in the original investigation. For decades, he lived a normal life in the community, shaking hands with neighbors every Sunday, attending Lillian's memorial events, looking her family in the eye, while no one suspected a thing. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below. I always love knowing how far these stories reach. Tonight, we're going back to October 1958, tracing every mistake, every overlooked clue, and the unexpected breakthrough in 2012 that finally brought answers to one of Kansas's most baffling cold cases. This is a story of loss, deception, persistence, and justice that arrived late, but was never denied. In 1958, Kansas still carried the strong post-World War II Midwestern look, where the economy revolved around farming, harvests, and small, tight-knit communities. Riverton, sitting near the Missouri state line, was exactly that kind of place. A few thousand people, one main street, lined with small shops, a gas station, a church, and a post office. Everyone knew everyone. Life moved slowly and predictably, and big disruptions were rare. The Lantern Café sat right along the highway, the kind of diner where truckers, farmers, and locals stopped for coffee, lunch, and conversation. It was owned by Harold and Lillian Weaver, a middle-aged couple seen as hardworking and reliable. Harold, the quiet one, ran the kitchen. Lillian handled the front of house and the books. They lived in a small house a few blocks away, had no children, and poured nearly all their time into the business. To the town, their diner was part of daily life. Still, people close to them sometimes mentioned that the couple didn't always get along. Lillian was strong-willed and decisive. Harold was stubborn and quick-tempered. Plenty of folks had overheard them arguing after closing, but no one thought it would ever lead to anything serious. The day everything happened, Riverton looked no different than any other. The cafe opened early, stayed busy with a steady stream of customers. Harold stayed in the kitchen, Lillian waited tables and handled the register. Staff later said the atmosphere felt tense. The couple spoke in low voices and clearly weren't happy. When the last customer left, it was already dark. Harold stayed to wash dishes while Lillian finished closing out the till. Then she walked out to the back storage building, the area where supplies and dry goods were kept, to put things away. The yellow light from the diner still spilled through the windows, and that was the last time anyone saw her. The next morning, Lillian never came home and never showed up at the cafe. An employee arrived to open and found the place still locked, lights off, everything untouched. Harold said he thought she'd gone to her sister's house in Baxter Springs, but when they called, no one there had seen her. Family, friends, and a few neighbors started searching the diner property, the empty lot behind it, and along the highway. No sign of her, and no one had seen her the night before. By noon, Harold Weaver walked into the Riverton police station and reported that his wife had been missing since the previous night. Sheriff Earl Nichols was on duty when the man walked in, hands still dusted with flour and smelling of fryer oil. Nichols took the report, logged it, and opened a new missing person file numbered #58174. In a small town like Riverton, disappearances were rare, usually just a drunk sleeping it off somewhere, or a teenager leaving town for a few days. But when Harold mentioned they'd argued at their own diner before she vanished, Nichols decided he had to visit the scene that same day. He and 2 deputies brought a camera, notebooks, and measuring tape, and drove to the Lantern Café on the main road to Highway 166. The diner was closed, the wooden sign swaying gently in the wind, curtains drawn. Harold unlocked the door, and Nichols stepped inside. The interior was tidy, tables and chairs in perfect order, clean tablecloths, dishes stacked neatly. On the counter sat a cold cup of coffee next to the revenue ledger and a small notebook. Nichols noted it and had photos taken. The kitchen in back was spotless, grease wiped down, tools washed and lined up. No signs of a struggle, nothing broken. Nichols recorded the scene as orderly, no visible evidence of violence. Out back, he noticed the storage shed door was slightly ajar, and a section of the concrete floor looked freshly poured, the color uneven. He crouched down, saw mixing marks still visible, but nothing obviously wrong, so he simply noted new concrete. Inside the shed were a few bags of flour, an old metal drum, and dusty tools. Nichols had the deputies measure and photograph the entire layout and draw a site map. He went back inside and took Harold Weaver's official statement. Harold said the diner closed. His wife went to the storage shed. He cleaned the kitchen for about 20 minutes, then didn't see her again. He assumed she'd gone to her sister's, went home himself, and only grew worried the next morning when she didn't return. When asked about their marriage, Harold said they argued only about work, nothing serious. Nichols wrote everything down carefully, had Harold sign, and noted in the preliminary report, no signs of forced entry, no physical evidence of violence. After finishing the scene documentation, Nichols sealed the diner keys and returned them to Harold with instructions not to change anything until further notice. He sent the deputies back to take more photos of the surrounding area, the path to the shed, the empty lot, and the nearby railroad tracks. Everything was brought back to the station for filing. By late afternoon, Nichols completed the first official report, time of the missing person report, scene description, husband's statement, and a final note that the victim may have left the area voluntarily. The report was signed, stamped, filed, and a missing person bulletin was sent to neighboring stations within a 10-mile radius per Cherokee County rules. To Nichols, this was simply a missing person case to monitor, nothing yet warranted a criminal investigation. He left the office that evening with a copy of the file in his pocket, planning to recheck the diner the next day if there was still no word. As night fell, Riverton returned to its quiet self, streetlights glowing on empty roads, and in the police station, file #58174, sat neatly in a wooden cabinet, the first step in a case everyone assumed would soon resolve, like any other routine disappearance. The next morning, as planned in the initial report, Sheriff Earl Nichols returned to the Lantern Café to expand the search of the surrounding area. He brought the same 2 deputies, a camera, measuring tape, and a town plat map. The goal was to thoroughly examine the entire lot behind the storage shed, the last place Lillian Weaver was known to have been. The area sat separated from homes, less than 100 meters from the railroad tracks, with an open field of ripening corn beyond. Nichols started by measuring and marking the shed door, shadows, distances to the fence, and the old wood pile. The ground behind the shed was dry and hard, weeds growing unevenly, with a few patches of bare, newer-looking dirt. One deputy crouched down and noticed the concrete section in the corner of the shed was freshly poured, the surface still lighter and less dusty. Nichols stepped closer, tapped it lightly with his pencil, and heard a slightly hollow sound compared to the older slab. He wrote the detail down, ordered photos from 4 angles, and measured the patch. It was roughly 1.5 meters by 1 meter, rectangular, right against the shed wall. The only visible difference was a clear seam between the new and old concrete. Nichols sketched it on the site map and labeled it, in 1. Newly poured concrete, purpose unknown. Walking around the shed, he spotted faint old tire tracks in the dirt leading toward the open lot behind, often used for storing materials or burning trash. Among the dry ashes were half-burned pieces of wood, nothing unusual. Nichols had photos taken and soil samples collected, labeled M58. Farther out, the railroad line ran east-west freight trains, sometimes stopped briefly at night. Nichols sent 1 deputy 200 meters south along the tracks, looking for footprints or discarded items. Nothing was found. He noted no evidence of movement and compared the diner's location to the town's main exits. Only 2 realistic routes, one to Baxter Springs and one to Highway 166. Both busy enough in the evenings that someone leaving on foot or by car would likely have been seen. Nichols returned to the shed one more time, remeasured the new concrete, and took close-up photos. He checked town building records for recent permits. None were on file for that address. That caught his attention, but in 1958, a small private concrete pour didn't require reporting. At the end of the survey, Nichols and the team compiled a full site map: diner, shed, back, lot, railroad, and open field. All photos were pasted into the file with handwritten notes marking checked locations. In the final comments, Nichols wrote, "No traces of departure, no signs of struggle, surrounding area quiet, normal traffic." The report was stamped that day and forwarded with the missing person file to the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office as required. That afternoon, Nichols returned to the station, organized all photos and maps into the permanent file, and temporarily concluded the scene offered no further leads. A few details lingered: the fresh concrete and a faint lingering smell of cement, but in his judgment, they were simply noted for future reference, not yet enough to expand the investigation. As dusk fell, Nichols locked the cabinet, signed the second report of the day, and wrote, "Area survey complete, no evidence of departure or violence found." The following morning, with the area survey report finished and filed, Sheriff Earl Nichols moved to the next phase, taking statements from anyone who might have seen or spoken to Lillian Weaver before she vanished. The witness list included 3 Lantern Café employees, 1 nearby resident, and the owner of the radio shop across the street. Statements were taken either at the Riverton police station or at the scene, handwritten and signed. First witness, Rose Galvin, evening waitress. Rose said the diner had stayed open later than usual because a group of long-haul truckers stopped for a late meal. When they left, only Lillian was in the dining area and Harold was in the kitchen. Rose left around 10 p.m. Lillian was wiping tables and closing the register. Rose remembered the mood being tense. Lillian looked tired and avoided talking to her husband. She also confirmed hearing a short argument about paying a supplier. When Nichols asked the exact last moment she saw Lillian, Rose said, "When I walked out the door, she was standing in the kitchen with her back to me, holding a dish rag." Nichols logged that time as approximately 21:50 and noted, "Last direct witness sighting of victim." Second witness, Frank Miles, owner of the radio shop across the street. Miles was closing up and could clearly see the diner's lights. He saw Harold Weaver standing at the back door, holding something that looked like a sack or bundled cloth. He never saw Lillian. Miles left his shop around 11 p.m. The diner lights were still on. When asked about noises, he heard no shouting or commotion. Nichols marked this as indirect visual witness, time approximately 22:45. Nichols then spoke to two neighbors. An elderly woman heard only passing trucks and wind, nothing unusual. A night shift worker who walked past the diner around 11:30 p.m. said the kitchen light was still on, but no one was outside. Both statements were recorded, but added no new information about movement or behavior. Nichols interviewed Harold Weaver a second time to cross-check timelines. Harold repeated the same story. Wife went to the shed around 9:30, he finished cleaning, and left. When Nichols compared Harold's and Rose Galvin's accounts, the overall timeline lined up reasonably well, but only Harold mentioned Lillian ever leaving the building. He wrote in his notes, "No witness saw the victim leave the premises." To complete the file, Nichols had a deputy create a master timeline chart with 4 key points. 9 p.m. Lillian still working inside the diner. 9:50 p.m. Rose leaves, sees Lillian in the kitchen. 10:45 p.m. Radio shop owner sees Harold at back door. No Lillian. 11:30 p.m. Lights still on. No one outside. The times were plotted on the site map for reference. Nichols' final note in the witness report read, "Exact time of disappearance undetermined, likely between 22 o'clock, 23 o'clock. All statements were copied, signed, and attached to file hash 58174. After reviewing the witness list, Nichols realized not a single person could confirm seeing Lillian leave the diner, leave town, or appear anywhere in public after that evening. The summary report ended with, "Direction of travel undetermined. No witness observed victim leaving Riverton." Nichols closed the file that day, added his signature, and considered the witness phase complete. After completing the witness interviews and compiling the timeline, Sheriff Earl Nichols decided to expand the search beyond the diner's immediate area. He submitted a request to the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office for additional manpower and simultaneously called on townspeople to join a volunteer search team. Within 2 days, nearly 40 people, including local officers, firefighters, carpenters, farmers, and young men from the town, had signed up. Each group was assigned a sector, equipped with handheld maps, compasses, and single-frequency walkie-talkies. The search radius was set at 10 miles from the Lantern Café, covering the western fields, the railroad line stretching south, the small riverbank to the east, and the abandoned warehouses near the old industrial area. Nichols established a temporary command post in the parking lot behind Riverton Church. The operation began at dawn. Teams advanced in sweep lines, maintaining a 10-meter interval between searchers to ensure nothing was missed. The first team focused on the harvested cornfield, where the soft soil could easily hold footprints. After 3 hours of sweeping, they found only tractor tire tracks and farmers' boot prints, nothing noteworthy. The second team examined the railroad tracks, walking both sides of the rails near the diner. They closely inspected the gravel bed, drainage ditches, culverts, and roadside embankments. But aside from a few wood scraps and old beer cans, no personal items that could belong to the victim were found. The third team was assigned the old warehouses east of town, 3 abandoned wooden structures dating back to the war years. Inside, it was dark and dusty, with rat tracks and old trash, but nothing unusual. Nichols personally supervised this area and ordered photographs for the record. He noted the damp smell and slight settling of the soil in the corner of the largest warehouse, but seeing no signs of digging, simply marked it on the map for reference. By afternoon, the search shifted to drainage ditches and roadside grassy areas where local children often played. Some residents brought hunting dogs, but the animals picked up nothing beyond the scent of earth and burnt trash. Autumn winds blew hard, kicking up dust in waves and making visibility difficult. Nichols briefly halted the search for a quick debrief and to review the list of cleared zones. More than 20 areas had been checked and marked complete, all with no physical evidence or signs of a struggle. The local paper ran a short article, "Riverton woman missing, no trace found." That evening, Nichols and the team leaders reviewed reports, added timeline details, coordinates, and weather notes. On the second day, the operation expanded northward along Highway 166, a route heavily traveled by trucks. Police set up a temporary checkpoint, questioning drivers who had passed through on the night of the disappearance, but no one had seen a woman walking or trying to hitch a ride. A few drivers mentioned seeing the diner's lights still on late, but nothing else. Nichols noted that the likelihood of her leaving town by vehicle was low. No personal vehicle was missing, and no late-night buses ran that evening. In the afternoon of the second day, he sent teams to recheck both sides of the road, connecting Riverton to Baxter Springs, where Lillian's family had relatives. The search proceeded slowly. The weather grew colder, morning fog thick and visibility limited. Searchers patiently waded through fields, checking every pond, tree base, and roadside ditch. After 3 full days, the entire 10-mile radius around the town had been covered. No clothing, documents, jewelry, or any item identifiable as the victims was found. Nichols wrote in his duty log, "No trace, nothing found." A closing meeting was held in the town hall, attended by representatives from the county sheriff's office, the fire department, and volunteers. Nichols presented the results, thanked everyone for their effort, and confirmed that every possible search avenue had been thoroughly pursued. The official report stated, "No body, no personal effects, no evidence of foul play in the surveyed area." The search file was attached to missing person case, #58174, and stamped mission complete. Finally, Nichols ordered that the witness list and cleared zone maps be retained for future reference. The search operation ended quietly. Riverton returned to its familiar rhythm. The Lantern Café remained shuttered, its windows coated in dust. In the sheriff's log, the last entry for the search simply read, "No results, no leads." After the search ended, Sheriff Earl Nichols spent 2 days reviewing every document, photograph, and field report. He sat in his small office behind the station, a thick stack of files in front of him that included area maps, witness statements, survey notes, and team reports. Nichols went through each item, marking points for possible follow-up with pencil. The entire investigation had lasted nearly a week, yet yielded no physical evidence whatsoever. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no abandoned items, and no witness who saw Lillian leave town. The timeline aligned reasonably well. Lillian was still inside the diner when the staff left. The lights stayed on late, then went out before midnight. The disappearance occurred within a 3-hour window, yet in that time no one saw her anywhere else. Nichols wrote in his initial comments, "No evidence establishing criminal activity." Following standard procedure, he analyzed the possibilities: voluntary departure, accident, or foul play. The last 2 were ruled out due to lack of evidence. Voluntary departure seemed the most plausible, even without a vehicle or witness, because Kansas law at the time allowed adults to leave their residence without notification. Nichols added a preliminary conclusion: insufficient criminal elements, investigation suspended pending new leads. He called Harold Weaver to the office to inform him of the outcome. Harold sat silently, showed no reaction, and only asked whether the police would continue searching. Nichols answered, per regulations, that the case would be reopened if new evidence emerged. He observed Harold's demeanor and noted in the file, cooperative, calm, no unusual behavior. That noon, Nichols finalized the official summary report. The introduction recapped the timeline. Report received October 18th, scene processed, witnesses interviewed, Expanded 10-mile search conducted, no results. The body detailed each element seen tidy. No evidence, warehouse behind diner, had newly poured concrete of undetermined purpose. Timeline corroborated by witnesses and the person who reported her missing. No witness confirmed the victim leaving town. In the final assessment, Nichols concluded, case treated as voluntary missing person, no basis at this time for criminal classification. Recommend file inactivation pending new lid. The report was typed, signed, stamped by the Riverton Sheriff's Office, and a copy sent to Cherokee County as required. That afternoon, Nichols locked all documents in the safe, numbered them, and filed them under open cases, awaiting further information. On the last page of the report he added a personal note. Suggest short-term monitoring of diner and reporting party, but insufficient legal grounds for surveillance. At the end of the day, Nichols stepped out onto the porch and looked down the quiet street. Riverton lay calm. Trucks passed infrequently on the highway and far off. The Lantern Café sat motionless, its windows gray with dust. In the town's filing system, Lillian Weaver's case was officially marked, processed unresolved, and under the administrative procedures of the era that effectively closed the missing person investigation until new information surfaced. In the months after Lillian Weaver's missing person file was placed on inactive status, life in Riverton returned to normal. The Lantern Café closed for good, its wooden sign faded, and talk of the vanished woman gradually faded from conversation. Sheriff Earl Nichols moved on to other minor cases in the area, regarding Lillian's disappearance as one of many unsolved files. In hindsight, however, numerous investigative shortcomings existed that went unnoticed at the time, and later proved to be the reason the case could not advance further in its early stage. First, at the warehouse scene behind the diner, Nichols merely noted the freshly poured concrete slab, but did not collect samples. Under procedures of that era, construction material sampling was done only when clear criminal indicators existed, whereas Lillian's case was classified as a voluntary missing person. Failure to preserve concrete samples meant any potential physical evidence was permanently lost and could never be tested for a connection to the disappearance timeline. The second error was not testing the ash and soil around the open area behind the building. During the initial survey, Nichols recorded traces of ash and a faint chemical smell but dismissed them as ordinary burn barrel residue and did not collect samples for analysis. In 1958, the Cherokee County Forensics Lab lacked equipment to detect organic traces in soil, so such evidence was routinely overlooked. Not preserving soil samples eliminated any future chance of determining whether something had been burned there. The third gap was failing to check records of hired contractors or material invoices for the diner. Nichols recorded new concrete pour in his scene report, but never required verification of who did the work, exact dates, or the source of the cement. In a small town, owners often did repairs themselves, so he assumed it was routine maintenance. Investigative protocols at the time had no mechanism to cross-reference building supply stores or permits, so this crucial detail was entirely missed. The fourth mistake was not placing the reporting party under surveillance during the critical first 48 hours. By modern standards, the closest relative who reports a missing person must be monitored and re-interviewed to compare statements, but in 1958, such measures were rarely applied at the town level. Nichols met Harold Weaver twice, noted his cooperation and lack of suspicious behavior, then allowed him complete freedom of movement without any monitoring. Had surveillance or behavioral logging occurred during that window, leads might have surfaced earlier. The fifth and most significant error was not elevating the file to the state level for technical support. When the investigation concluded, Nichols only forwarded the report to Cherokee County and did not request assistance from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation because he believed criminal elements were insufficient. State law at the time permitted towns to handle non-criminal missing person cases themselves, so Lillian's case remained local. Delaying escalation meant the case was never reviewed by state forensic specialists with better analytical equipment. All records, photos, and reports were simply archived without further review. Years later, when the chain of events was re-examined, Investigators cited it as a classic example of how a missing person case could be buried simply due to lack of standardized procedures. Nichols himself, in a private memo written years after retirement, admitted he had placed too much trust in surface appearances and dismissed alternative possibilities. Under the administrative system of the day, a town sheriff had full authority over local files with no requirement for cross-checks or independent review, so once a case was deemed insufficient criminal elements, the entire legal process considered it closed. Those 5 investigative oversights, not sampling the concrete, not testing ash and soil, not verifying the contractor, not monitoring the reporting party in the first 48 hours, and not escalating to the state, formed a chain of missed opportunities that quickly pushed Lillian Weaver's disappearance into indefinite suspension. In the final internal memo before archiving, Nichols wrote only, "No evidence of crime. Await new leads." From that point, the case sat untouched in Riverton storage for decades, with no further investigative activity. After Lillian Weaver's missing person file was inactivated and labeled inactive pending lead, life in Riverton swiftly returned to normal. In 1959, Harold Weaver sold all his property, including the small house and the Lantern Café, to a family from a neighboring town. The transaction was quiet and drew little attention. Harold told neighbors he wanted to move elsewhere and start over, citing poor business at the diner. In June of that year, he left Riverton without providing a formal forwarding address. After his departure, the diner building stayed shuttered. Old kitchen equipment was cleared out by the new owners and then abandoned. The warehouse behind the building, where the new concrete pour had once been noted, remained untouched. Weeds grew around the foundation, and the tin roof rusted over time. By year's end, the place had no tenant. The Lantern Café sign peeled and tilted sideways. From then on, the property became a forgotten corner of Riverton, sitting silently along the road to Highway 166. In the sheriff's office, missing person file #58174 was placed by Nichols in the last cabinet of the records room. Under a new Kansas regulation at the time, non-criminal missing person cases could be transferred to state archives after 12 months if no new leads appeared. In December 1959, Nichols signed the transfer paperwork and sent the complete file field reports, statements, photographs, maps and search notices to the Central Archive in Topeka. The file was officially labeled Weaver, Lillian. Missing person #58174, inactive. After transfer, a condensed copy remained in Riverton, while the originals and all photographic evidence were shipped by state mail to the Kansas State Police. From that moment, the case was no longer under local jurisdiction. Nichols added one final line to his duty log. File transferred, no further developments. In the years that followed, Lillian Weaver's name occasionally surfaced in coffee shop or church conversations, but only as a vague memory. Riverton continued growing along the new highway. Houses and stores sprang up around the center, and the old diner site gradually disappeared behind trees and overgrowth. No one remembered the concrete patch behind the warehouse, and no one cared that the missing person file now lay in Topeka, among thousands of others, folders stacked in steel cabinets, each marked only by a dry string of numbers. Per state procedure, archivists reviewed inactive files once a year to confirm status. On the 1960 list, the entry read, Weaver, Lillian, no update, and the same line was retyped unchanged in every subsequent year. Local newspapers that once carried the story stopped mentioning it. New residents of Riverton rarely learned that a woman had vanished without a trace in their own town. Older residents sometimes recalled that something like that had happened, but no one remembered details. The Lantern Café remained boarded up for years, later briefly used as storage before being abandoned again. In the winter of 1965, the front awning collapsed. The white paint peeled in patches, yet the concrete floor inside remained exactly as it had been the day the diner closed. In the State Police Archive, file #58174 rested among hundreds of others, checked only once a year to confirm it remained unsolved. Lillian Weaver's name gradually vanished from Riverton's collective memory, and her disappearance officially faded into oblivion within the sealed paper system of an era when investigations still relied heavily on intuition and the technological limits of the time. By early 2012, the lot that once housed the Lantern Café had completely changed. After more than half a century of abandonment, the site was purchased by Cargill Midwest to build a new agricultural storage facility. Construction began in February and included completely leveling the old building, removing the original foundation, and pouring new industrial-grade concrete. During the work, the crew used a jackhammer to break up the old concrete slab behind what had been the storage area of the cafe, a slab that dated back to the 1950s. When the layer of cement, more than 12 inches thick, was cracked open, one of the workers spotted a hard, grayish-white object mixed in with the aggregate. At first, they thought it was a piece of pipe or animal bone, but as they dug further, the remaining parts clearly revealed a shape unlike any livestock bones. The site foreman immediately ordered work stopped and called the local police. The Cherokee County Sheriff's Office arrived within an hour, sealed the area with yellow tape, removed all workers, and began examining the scene. The old concrete slab was cordoned off over an area larger than 3 square meters. It was cracked and broken into chunks in many places. In one large fissure, in addition to bone fragments, investigators recovered a woman's silver wristwatch with a rusted metal band but a still legible Belova mark on the face, a style common in the late 1950s. Nearby were scraps of woven fabric and a small rusted metal button. Police immediately summoned the crime scene unit to collect the evidence. Excavation proceeded with extreme care. Chunks of concrete were removed by hand tools to avoid damaging the bone structure. By late afternoon, they had recovered more than 20 separate bone fragments, including portions of the skull, jaw, and an arm bone. Everything was placed in sealed evidence bags, labeled temporarily, Evidence C-1241. The Sheriff's Department's preliminary scene report noted, human skeletal remains discovered within concrete foundation of former commercial property. Possible connection to historical missing person case. Once the exact area was determined, the entire construction site was fully sealed, and temporary tents were erected to protect the excavation zone. Forensic technicians photographed the scene from multiple angles, created a distribution map of the evidence, and measured the position of each bone fragment relative to the slab edges and former walls. All workers present at the time of discovery were interviewed and confirmed that the excavated section was in the northwest corner, precisely where the cafe's storage room had once stood. After being informed about the watch and the skeletal characteristics, the Cherokee County Sheriff cross-referenced the State Archive database and located a 1958 missing person file for Lillian Weaver, whose listed address matched the property. That same evening, he contacted the Kansas Bureau of Investigation office in Wichita. The KBI took over the case, ordered all evidence sealed and stored at the county facility, and arranged for forensic anthropologists to examine it on site. The next morning, the excavation area was expanded by another 10 square meters to ensure no adjacent foundation was missed. Technicians dug down to the original soil layer and noted a clear color difference between the native dirt and the concrete. During this process, they recovered another clothing button and a small piece of metal wire, which were added to the original evidence. Entire sections of concrete were cut into blocks and transported to the KBI laboratory. Local Cherokee County media ran a short item. Human remains discovered during demolition work in Riverton. Possible link to old missing person case. Because identification was still pending, details were kept limited, and the site remained closed. Older residents who heard the news immediately recalled the story of the woman who vanished in 1958, though no one remembered specifics. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office completed a 12-page scene report with photographs, diagrams, and an evidence list. The preliminary conclusion stated that the concrete containing the remains was the original storage room floor, not a later addition, and that the pour date was estimated to be consistent with the late 1950s. On March 5, 2012, Cherokee County formally transferred the case file to the KBI, officially reopening a missing person investigation that had gathered dust for over 50 years. Immediately after receiving the Cherokee County report of human remains found in concrete at the former Lantern Café site, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation opened a reinvestigation file. The director of the KBI Special Investigations Division signed the order creating a 3-member cold case team with lead investigator Susan Danner, an agent with many years of experience on long-dormant cases, assigned as primary. On March 7, 2012, Danner arrived at the Riverton site with the forensic team to accept custody of all evidence and the complete scene file from the sheriff's office. She ordered full duplication of all documents, topographic maps, period photographs, and the original 1958 witness list. That same afternoon, Danner returned to Wichita, headquarters of the state's old records archive, and pulled missing person file hash 58174. After hours of searching, she located the original 64 yellowed pages in an old folder, along with black and white photos of the cafe, area diagrams, and the signature of then-Sheriff Earl Nichols. Reading the original 1958 reports, Danner noted several irregularities. A scene survey from that year mentioned recently poured cement slab, purpose unknown, yet there was no record that Nichols had taken samples or investigated its origin. While reviewing attached documents, she found a significant timeline detail. Nichols's final report was dated October 28, 1958. Whereas an invoice from Riverton Cement Company attached to local government records showed delivery on October 19, 1958, just 2 days after Lillian Weaver was reported missing. Danner highlighted the discrepancy in red and wrote, "Inconsistency between disappearance and date of construction, verify further." She instructed the records staff to pull Riverton business registries for 1957, 1959 to identify the cement purchaser. The signature on the order was Harold Weaver's. Danner considered this the key breakthrough, indicating possible alteration of the scene immediately after the victim vanished. In her internal report to superiors, she recommended 3 main steps: 1. Full reanalysis of all new evidence from Riverton bones, concrete, metal, fabric. 2. Location of any surviving 1958 witnesses. 3. Timeline verification of all original statements. She also requested current residency records to locate any living relatives or acquaintances of Lillian for DNA comparison. At the same time, she borrowed all 1958 photos of the cafe from Cherokee County Archives and compared them with the 2012 construction maps to pinpoint the exact boundary between the dining area and storage room. That evening, the cold case team held its first internal meeting in Wichita. Members agreed on procedure. All evidence would go to the Topeka Forensic Lab for DNA and cement analysis. The field team would return to Riverton for additional geological data and to interview surviving local residents. Danner drafted an 8-page master plan titled Reopening File Hash 58174, Weaver, Lillian. She ordered verification of the current status of 2 original witnesses, Rose Galvin and Frank Miles, who in 1958 had reported seeing Harold Weaver on the night of the incident. She also directed a search for any information on former Sheriff Earl Nichols in case he was still alive and could be interviewed. Before leaving the office that day, Danner uploaded all new electronic data, tagged the case active cold case, and created a pending forensic results calendar item. In her final note she wrote, "Discrepancy between disappearance date and concrete pour is the first point requiring verification. Next steps, finalize witness list and initiate forensic examination." When she left, file hash 58174 was officially reactivated after more than half a century in storage in Topeka. Immediately after the KBI cold case team was formed and the investigation plan approved, the evidence recovered at Riverton was transported to the Kansas State Forensic Laboratory in Topeka. Intake occurred on March 9, 2012, under supervision of the chief crime scene examiner and 2 forensic technicians. All items were properly sealed, including individually numbered bone fragments, the Bulova watch, 2 metal buttons, and concrete samples from the discovery area. The lab created case file 212093. Bone samples were sent directly to the anthropology unit. After 2 days of preliminary optical and X-ray examination, experts determined the remains belonged to an adult female, approximately 5'5" to 5'7", tall and age 25-30. Mineralization and bone density measurements showed natural calcification over decades in a sealed environment, with no evidence of burning or direct fire exposure, indicating the body had been encased in concrete shortly after death. The skull exhibited a longitudinal fracture from the occipital region, extending to the right temple, consistent with blunt force trauma from a heavy object causing direct brain injury. Experts determined the injury was perimortem, occurring while the victim was still alive, because the fracture edges showed vital reaction, bone damage while blood circulation was present. In the preliminary report to KBI, the chief medical examiner concluded, probable cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. No signs of dismemberment or other mechanical separation were present. Following sex and cause of death determination, the next step was DNA analysis for identification. Because the bones were heavily degraded, the lab extracted nuclear DNA from femoral marrow and intact tooth enamel. Processing took nearly a week and produced a complete 12-locus nuclear DNA profile, suitable for comparison with the National NAMIUS database, the U.S. system for missing and unidentified persons. The profile was entered on March 16, 2012, along with location, sex, and estimated date. 3 days later, the system returned a potential match with a missing person entry, filed in 2007 by a relative of Lillian Weaver, who disappeared in October 1958 in Riverton, Kansas. The reference sample had been submitted by Lillian's granddaughter during a National Historical Missing Persons Initiative. After confirmatory testing at an independent Missouri state lab, KBI officially announced the identification. The skeletal remains found in the concrete belonged to Lillian Weaver, born 1933, missing since October 1958. The complete 38-page forensic report, signed by the chief medical examiner, was sent to the KBI Wichita office with illustrations of trauma marks, bone diagrams, and DNA charts. The conclusion stated, identity confirmed with 99.98% certainty. Other items were analyzed concurrently. The Bulova watch had stopped at 9:57, consistent with witness statements about the cafe's closing time. Corrosion analysis and styling dated the watch to 1956 production, a common women's model, further supporting that it belonged to Lillian. The forensic report added, no evidence the remains were moved after burial. The body has lain in place since initial encasement. Upon receiving the identification results, KBI officially changed file hash 58174 from missing person to identified remains, homicide suspicion, and synchronized the data with national systems, opening a new investigative phase. In an internal memo, Susan Danner recorded all key forensic findings, highlighting female, matching age, blunt force head trauma, time of death, coinciding with the 1958 disappearance. By the end of March 2012, the Topeka lab completed all testing and returned the sealed evidence to KBI. The final forensic conclusion read, positive identification of Lillian Weaver, death due to severe blunt force trauma to the head, time of death consistent with the recorded 1958 disappearance. After the forensic identification confirmed that the skeletal remains belonged to Lillian Weaver, the KBI task force shifted its focus to analyzing the remaining physical evidence recovered from the crime scene in order to establish the context and timing of the body's burial. On March 28, 2012, samples of cement and ash were sent to the Kansas State Building Materials Laboratory for chemical composition testing. The initial report noted that the concrete layer encasing the body exhibited clear differences from modern industrial cement. It contained a high proportion of fly ash and calcium silicate additives, characteristics typical of products manufactured in the late 1950s. The sample was compared against the State Construction Association's historical materials database and matched exactly the production formula of Riverton Cement Company, the sole supplier in the region at that time. This match helped narrow down the material's origin and provided the basis for the next step, tracing purchase records. The KBI investigative team traveled to the Cherokee County Commercial Archives office to locate the handwritten building materials purchase ledgers from 1957 to 1959. After reviewing the preserved volumes stored in the warehouse, they discovered an entry dated October 19, 1958, recording an order for 15 bags of cement signed for by an individual named H. Weaver. The accompanying payment receipt, bearing confirmation signature and invoice hash 241B, listed the delivery address as the Lantern Café, Main Road, Riverton. When cross-referenced with the missing person file, the date on the invoice exactly matched 2 days after Lillian was reported missing. The KBI immediately photocopied and sealed the document, transporting it back to Wichita for inclusion in the case file. An internal report noted, material purchased by Harold Weaver, recorded within 48 hours after disappearance of Lillian Weaver, potential link to concrete layer. To verify accuracy, Danner requested radiometric dating of the on-site concrete sample and comparison of air void porosity with period-correct test concrete. Results indicated the slab had been poured between mid-October and early November 1958, with a 2-week margin of error, perfectly aligning with the time frame of Lillian's disappearance. Additionally, atomic absorption spectroscopy of old ash recovered from the backlot revealed abnormally high levels of phosphorus and potassium, indicative of organic combustion. Although insufficient biological material remained for definitive sourcing, examiners concluded the ash contained traces of decomposed animal or human protein. Danner compiled these findings into a 24-page physical evidence report that clearly demonstrated the correlation between the building materials, the cement purchase date, and the disappearance timeline. She highlighted the key point: materials were purchased, transported, and used at the same location within a time frame coinciding with the incident. On that basis, the KBI task force determined there was strong probable cause to support the hypothesis that the concrete slab was poured after Lillian's death in order to conceal and protect the burial site. For further corroboration, investigators visited the former headquarters of Riverton Cement Company, now merged into a larger corporation. In the company's archival warehouse, they located an old delivery ledger whose October 19, 1958, entry perfectly matched the copy provided by the county archives. Under delivery address, it was handwritten as Lantern Café, H. Weaver, and the received byline bore a signature matching samples from Harold Weaver's business license documents. A note, indifferent ink reading cash payment confirmed the transaction was completed the same day. This constituted the only direct evidence proving Harold purchased and took delivery of the concrete materials immediately after Lillian vanished. Combining the ash analysis results, cement data, and sales records, Danner issued a preliminary conclusion in an internal memo. The concrete layer where the body was found had been poured within 48 to 72 hours of the disappearance, using cement sourced from Riverton Cement Company and personally signed for and paid for by Harold Weaver. The report included photographs of the original invoice, a site map of the concrete slab, chemical analysis results, and corrosion comparison charts. The concluding section stated, concrete layer poured during period consistent with disappearance, deliberate act of concealment suspected. These findings were forwarded to KBI's main investigative division as the basis for continued tracing of the husband's actions at the time of Lillian's disappearance. Once the physical evidence review was complete and the clear connection between the concrete layer and the disappearance timeline was established, the KBI task force moved to its next objective, locating and re-interviewing witnesses listed in the original 1958 file in light of the new forensic data. Investigator Susan Danner reviewed the old witness list, which contained 4 names. 2 individuals had since passed away, leaving only Rose Galvin, a former waitress at the Lantern Café, and Frank Miles, owner of the radio shop across the street, still contactable. Danner and forensic technician Patrick Shaw traveled to Wichita, where Rose now lived in a nursing home. She was over 80, and her memory was slow, but she clearly recalled her years working in Riverton. When shown photographs of the old cafe, Rose recognized it immediately and said it was where she had worked for 3 years before moving away. Danner presented her with a copy of her 1958 statement and asked if she wished to add anything. Rose read slowly, then recounted that on the night of the incident, the atmosphere in the cafe was unusually tense. Quieter than normal, Harold barely spoke, and Lillian avoided eye contact. She remembered that when she finished clearing tables, the wall clock showed just before 10 p.m., and as she left, she heard metallic clanging from behind the storage shed, along with a strong smell of wet cement and chemicals, like paint or concrete mixing oil. She had not mentioned it in 1958 because she assumed it was ordinary repair work. Danner noted the details, time-stamping them 2150, metallic sounds and cement odor. Danner then asked about Harold's demeanor after the disappearance. Rose said he had been unnaturally calm, as if it didn't concern him. The interview was recorded, signed by Rose, and added to the new case file. The following day, Danner and Shaw went to Pittsburgh, Kansas, to meet 85-year-old Frank Miles, who lived with his son and, despite frail health, had a sharp memory. Upon hearing about the cold case reopening, Miles immediately said he had always felt something was off that night because he saw Harold behind the cafe with a flashlight. He remembered it clearly because the light caught his attention. He was bent over the ground. There was something that looked like a large sack. Danner reminded him that in 1958, he had reported seeing Harold carrying a strange object but lacked detail, and asked if he could now describe it more precisely. Miles said it was long and cylindrical, like a rolled-up blanket or a heavy bag, and he saw Harold dragging it toward the storage shed door. When shown crime scene photos, he pointed exactly to the northwest corner where the body was later found. This testimony drew particular attention because it matched the area identified in the concrete slab forensic report. When cross-checked with forensic data, Danner noted that the cement smell and metallic noises Rose mentioned coincided with the probable time Harold was mixing concrete on site. She created a new event timeline, 2150. Witness Rose hears metallic sounds and smells cement, 2245. Witness Miles sees Harold dragging a heavy object toward the shed, 23 o'clock. Cafe lights still on. These 3 points aligned perfectly with both the disappearance window and the forensic determination that the slab was poured within the following 48 hours. To ensure authenticity, the KBI video recorded both full interviews, obtained signed confirmations from the witnesses, and forwarded copies to the legal division. The internal report concluded, both independent witnesses described elements consistent with pouring a slab and moving a heavy object on the night of the disappearance. Their descriptions matched the physical forensic data and chemical analysis of the concrete samples. Danner added in her notes, witness Rose Galvin provided the cement odor detail, confirming the likelihood concrete was mixed that night. Witness Frank Miles pinpointed activity in the exact area where the body was recovered. Both statements strongly support the concealment theory occurring between 22 o'clock and 23 o'clock on October 18, 1958. The testimonies were deemed highly credible given the long passage of time, yet perfect consistency with physical evidence. The final report, completed April 2, 2012, concluded that the timeline provided by the witnesses matched all existing forensic and physical evidence, officially closing the phase of locating surviving witnesses in the Lillian Weaver disappearance. With witness statements completed, the KBI task force proceeded to the next investigative stage, a full 3D reconstruction of the Lantern Café storage shed as it existed in 1958. On April 5, 2012, KBI criminalistics technicians, working with the Topeka Forensic Lab and the Kansas State Spatial Data Analysis Center, began building a three-dimensional simulation of the site. Using original surveys, black and white photographs from the 1958 file, and current laser scans of the slab, they recreated the shed's original structure, including doorways, walls, drainage pipes, and concrete floor area. The model revealed that the northwest corner where the body was found was the last section to receive new concrete, visibly differing in thickness and cement color from the rest. Technicians reconstructed the floor layers by depth, color-coding each construction phase, the original 1955 slab, and a second layer added in mid-1958 that coincided with the disappearance. When 2012 excavation coordinates were overlaid, the body's location aligned perfectly with the newer pour, situated at the boundary between old and new sections. The technical team's report stated, the remains were placed within the supplemental pour zone at an average depth of 42 centimeters below the original floor level, in a lateral lying position consistent with measured dimensions. To reinforce this, the forensic lab compared concrete stratigraphy images with mineralization patterns on the bones. Results showed the mineral deposits on the exterior of the joints matched the chemical reaction of wet cement, proving the body was placed before the slab fully cured. Infrared spectroscopy of concrete in direct contact with bone revealed calcium hydroxide penetration into the bone tissue, confirming the body was present in fresh concrete at the time of pouring. The examiners concluded, mineral structure proves the human body was encased in concrete material immediately post-mortem. This could not be a natural process or later placement. For greater accuracy in recreating the pouring process, KBI consulted civil engineering experts from the University of Kansas. Using 3D modeling technology, they simulated mixing and pouring based on Harold Weaver's purchase of 15 bags of cement. The simulation showed that quantity was sufficient to cover the new floor section at a thickness of 30-40 cm, matching on-site measurements. The experts confirmed that if poured from late evening into early morning, the surface would appear dry by the next morning, raising no external suspicion. The completed technical model visually reconstructed the entire sequence without narration, Harold's position in the storage area, direction of cafe lighting, lines of sight for potential witnesses, and the precise spot where fresh concrete was mixed and leveled. The model was presented internally in Wichita and depicted the body lying on its side, head to the west, inside the freshly excavated section, then covered with wet concrete. The distance from the shed door to that spot was only about 3 meters, close enough for someone outside to hear the metallic clanging described by witness Rose Galvin. In the 54-page compiled technical report, specialists concluded that the entire slab containing the remains was unquestionably poured after Lillian Weaver's death, and the purpose was concealment. The report stated, there is no evidence this concrete was poured for repair or maintenance purposes. Thickness, material composition, and structural layering indicate intentional supplemental pouring to create a covering layer. When parameters were entered into the reconstruction system, the 3D model precisely displayed the new concrete block relative to the old floor, showing the new section was on average 3 centimeters higher and slightly offset toward the north wall, exactly matching the burial location. For objectivity, Danner requested an independent review by the Topeka Technical Lab. 2 days later, their confirming report arrived with identical findings. Posture and joint positioning correspond perfectly with the supplemental slab. No possibility the body was placed before the original floor existed. Danner's final report to the KBI director, completed April 10, 2012, synthesized all scientific evidence, technical modeling, and reconstruction imagery. The conclusion read, Lillian Weaver's body was buried in a concrete layer poured after October 18, 1958. Material, volume, and structure prove the pouring occurred within 48-72 hours of the victim's disappearance. Danner signed it, sealed the digital technical model and all data into the investigative file, and officially closed the crime scene reconstruction phase of the Riverton case. With crime scene reconstruction complete and forensic conclusions confirming that Lillian Weaver's body was buried in a concrete layer poured after her disappearance, the KBI task force moved to verifying the primary suspect, Harold Weaver, the victim's husband and the last known person to have seen her alive. Using Kansas residential records and interstate migration databases, the team searched tax registrations, driver's licenses, and social security data to locate him. Results showed Harold Weaver left Kansas in mid-1959, moved through several states, and eventually settled permanently in California. A 1984 federal tax record listed his fixed address in Oxnard, Ventura County. KBI sent an interagency request to the Oxnard Police Department for demographic confirmation and to check financial and criminal records. A response received within 48 hours confirmed Harold Weaver, born 1926, now 86 years old, resided in a coastal residential area in South Oxnard and held a driver's license valid until 2013. Medical records noted chronic heart disease and kidney failure, with regular treatment at a local hospital. In Kansas state court databases, Harold had no prior criminal convictions or charges beyond a minor 1957 administrative tax violation. However, financial analysis conducted by the team revealed that immediately after 1958, he withdrew all funds from the couple's joint account at Riverton Savings Bank and closed it just 2 weeks after the disappearance report. This action, combined with selling the cafe and leaving the state within months, made him the primary suspect. Danner prepared a summary report for the KBI director, listing all facts, cement purchase coinciding with the disappearance, physical evidence at the scene, witness statements confirming his presence behind the cafe that night, and proof of cash withdrawal and rapid relocation. All elements were tabulated in an investigative risk assessment concluding Harold Weaver, primary suspect, status alive, residing in California. Immediately upon residence confirmation, KBI requested coordination with the Ventura County Sheriff's Office and the Kansas State Prosecutor's Office to prepare necessary interstate legal procedures for questioning. The KBI Legal Division drafted paperwork for a federal material witness/subject interview order, citing newly discovered evidence and forensic results. Danner simultaneously ordered collection of Harold's property records, real estate transactions, and heir information in case he attempted to transfer assets or delegate authority. During research, the team discovered he once owned a small apartment in Bakersfield, sold in 1973, after which he ceased formal business activity. Current banking data showed he lived on pension and Social Security with no other income, meaning he was unlikely to flee the state, facilitating interrogation planning. On April 14, 2012, Danner signed the Suspect Location Verification Report, confirming Harold Weaver's address as 2143 Westport Avenue, Oxnard, attaching photographs from local tax records, medical file copies, and Ventura County confirmation. She drafted a detailed interrogation plan, including travel schedule, coordination with local police, and medical contingency procedures due to the suspect's advanced age. Danner emphasized in her notes, "Initial objective is a voluntary interview to obtain a statement before seeking a formal arrest warrant." The plan was approved by the KBI director the same day, authorizing the team to depart Wichita for California within 72 hours. With all preparatory files complete, Danner entered Harold's full personal, financial, and legal data into the system, marking his status suspect verified, interrogation pending, officially opening the direct investigation phase of the husband who had escaped scrutiny more than half a century earlier. 3 days after the interrogation plan was approved, the KBI task force, led by investigator Susan Danner, flew to California to coordinate with the Los Angeles Police Department and the Ventura County Sheriff's Office to interview Harold Weaver. On April 18, 2012, at 9 a.m., the investigation team arrived at his residence in Oxnard. Harold, then 86 years old, lived alone in a small beachside house and was described by neighbors as quiet, polite, and rarely leaving home except for medical appointments. Danner, along with Special Agent Patrick Shaw, presented a valid interrogation warrant and explained the purpose of the visit. Harold agreed to cooperate and was invited to the local police station for a formal recorded statement. The interrogation was fully video and audio recorded and began at 10:20 a.m. in interview room 3. In the presence of 2 LAPD representatives and a court-appointed public defender as required by law. In the initial portion, Danner briefly outlined the reinvestigation into Lillian Weaver's disappearance, showed Harold copies of the old case file, and presented photographs from the 2012 excavation site. When the photo of the Bulova watch was placed in front of him, he stared at it for a long time, then lowered his head and remained silent for nearly a minute. Danner asked if he recognized the item. Harold quietly replied, "That was hers." When asked when he last saw his wife, he said, "That night, at the cafe. We argued." Danner asked him to describe it in detail. Harold stated that on the night of October 18, 1958, after the cafe closed, Lillian blamed him for his handling of money and said she wanted to leave for a while. He admitted he became angry, threw a glass onto the floor, and raised his voice. Lillian turned away, and he followed her toward the back storage area to continue talking. "I just wanted her to listen to me, but she pushed me, then slipped and fell," he said, his voice trembling. When asked what happened next, Harold said he bent down to help her and saw that Lillian's head had struck the corner of a wooden table, with blood coming from the back of her head. He said she was no longer responsive, and he panicked. "I thought she was dead. I didn't know what to do." When Danner asked why he didn't call the police or a doctor, Harold replied, "I was scared. I thought they would say I killed her on purpose." He stated that after sitting motionless for several minutes, he decided to carry his wife's body into the storage room, placed it temporarily on the floor, and covered it with a tarp. "I couldn't look at her. I just sat there until almost dawn. The next morning, he went out and bought cement from Riverton Cement Company. I just thought, if I buried her in the floor, no one would ever find her." Danner asked him to describe the concreting process in detail. Harold said, "He mixed the cement right there in the storage room, using a shovel and buckets of water, working through the night. I laid her on her side, then poured the concrete over her. I couldn't believe I was doing it." When asked if anyone helped, he said he did it alone. The entire statement was fully recorded on video and audio. In the second part of the interrogation, Danner asked detailed questions about purchasing the materials. Harold confirmed he signed the invoice and paid in cash. "Because I didn't want any record." He said that after finishing the concrete, he cleaned the tools and threw the dirty clothes into the trash behind the cafe. Danner presented the results of the concrete and ash analysis and asked if he knew anything about burning materials. Harold admitted he burned the tarp that wrapped the body and some of Lillian's personal items, including her purse and coat, because I didn't want anyone to find them. When asked why he left Riverton the following year, Harold said he couldn't stand passing by the cafe. "Everything reminded me of it." He sold the business, moved away, and never told anyone. Throughout the interrogation, he was cooperative, answered clearly, and never asked to stop. Danner asked one final time, "Did you intentionally kill your wife?" Harold replied, "No. I just wanted her to stop. I didn't know it would turn out like this." He lowered his head, his hands shaking, and remained silent for a long time. After nearly 3 hours, the interrogation ended. The full statement was transcribed into a 17-page protocol. Harold read each section and signed at the bottom of every page, along with the witnessing signatures of the LAPD investigator and the attorney. In her notes, Danner wrote, "Suspect admitted to an argument that led to an accidental fatal injury, followed by concealment of the body by pouring concrete at the scene." Statement is consistent with forensic findings and witness testimony. The recording was duplicated, sealed, and sent back to Wichita, along with a notarized copy of the transcript. As Danner left the room, Harold remained seated, hands placed on the table, staring into space. Before it ended, he said quietly, "I've lived with this my whole life, but I never dared say it." That sentence was recorded in the final appendix of the protocol as a voluntary statement. The KBI task force completed the interrogation file and submitted a summary report to the agency director with a recommendation to proceed according to Kansas law. After completing the interrogation and obtaining a detailed confession from Harold Weaver, the KBI task force immediately began cross-referencing all information provided by the suspect with evidence collected throughout the investigation. On April 20th, 2012, the complete forensic files, physical evidence, and statement were transferred to the Comprehensive Analysis Unit at the Wichita office for comparison. The review lasted 4 days and was divided among 4 specialized teams: physical evidence, DNA data, transaction documents, and witness statements. The first team checked the consistency between the confession regarding pouring the concrete floor and the invoice evidence. In his statement, Harold admitted purchasing cement from Riverton Cement Company on October 19, 1958, paying cash and transporting it himself. The original invoice stored in the Cherokee County Commercial Archives confirmed the exact transaction date, signed by H. Weaver, with delivery address matching the Lantern Café. The quantity of 15 bags perfectly matched the calculated volume in the crime scene reconstruction model, demonstrating absolute consistency between the confession and physical records. Additionally, analysis of floor thickness, cement chemical composition, and material aging all fell within the time frame of 2 days after Lillian was reported missing, further strengthening evidentiary value. The second team compared the stated cause of death with forensic results. Harold said Lillian fell, striking her head on the corner of a wooden table during the argument, causing bleeding at the back of her skull. Skeletal examination revealed a large fracture on the right occipital bone, with wound direction consistent with impact against a horizontal edge. The fracture pattern and break characteristics indicated force applied from behind, exactly as the suspect described. Moreover, the absence of additional fractures or cuts confirmed no post-mortem violence. Forensic experts concluded injury structure matches the suspect's description of a fall with impact, though the possibility of impact caused by pushing cannot be ruled out. The DNA analysis team compared samples with biological material taken from Harold to confirm genetic relationship and rule out the possibility the remains belonged to someone else. Results showed Harold's DNA matched at 50% of genetic loci, confirming the legally recorded marital relationship and prior victim identification. This match, combined with previous identification results, absolutely validated both the victim's identity and the suspect's statement. The third team, KBI Legal Department, examined the confession regarding burning items and scene tampering. Harold admitted burning the tarp and Lillian's purse in the lot behind the storage room. Analysis of old ash samples from that area showed abnormally high organic protein and phosphorus traces via atomic spectroscopy, consistent with burning organic material. Although insufficient biological material remained for precise origin determination, the ash composition similarity was sufficient to corroborate the reported actions with physical data. The fourth team cross-checked the confession against living witnesses. Rose Galvin had reported hearing metallic noises and smelling cement around 10 p.m., while Harold said he began mixing concrete shortly after discovering Lillian dead, around 9:30 or later. Frank Miles saw Harold behind the cafe at 10:45 p.m., holding what looked like a sack and dragging it toward the storage room. These timelines perfectly matched Harold's sequence of moving the body and pouring concrete that same night. When all data was compiled, the comparison table showed 12 elements in complete agreement between the confession and collected evidence, including material purchase timing, concrete floor location, skull injury direction, witness sighting time frame, cement odor at the scene, and burned items. No significant contradictions existed across data sources. The KBI's 42-page comprehensive report stated, Harold Weaver's voluntary confession is fully consistent with physical forensic and witness evidence. All quantitative and qualitative factors confirm concealment of the body at the incident location within 48 hours of death. In the conclusion, investigator Susan Danner wrote, consistency between confession and evidence clearly establishes the chain of events. An argument at the cafe leading to death by head trauma, followed by the suspect pouring a concrete slab to conceal the body. The report was submitted to the KBI director and the Kansas State Prosecutor's Office, and the entire case file, interrogation transcript copies, and comparison data were sealed. The internal conclusion was officially signed on April 24, 2012, confirming evidence integrity and consistency between the suspect's confession and scientific investigation results, marking completion of the comprehensive analysis phase in the Lillian Weaver case. After the comparison report was finalized and signed, KBI formally transferred the entire case file to the Kansas Attorney General's office for prosecution consideration. Based on investigation results, the interrogation transcript and scientific evidence, the chief prosecutor in Topeka decided to seek an arrest warrant for Harold Weaver. On April 26, 2012, the Shawnee County District Court approved the arrest warrant requested by KBI on 2 preliminary charges: involuntary manslaughter, causing death through reckless conduct, and concealment of a body, intentionally hiding a corpse to obstruct investigation. The warrant was signed by Judge Theodore L. Madsen and sent to the Oxnard Police Department, California, along with interstate extradition paperwork under 18 U.S.C. Section 3182. On April 28, 2 KBI agents, together with LAPD and Ventura County deputies, arrived at Harold Weaver's home to execute the warrant. That morning, the quiet seaside neighborhood was calm. Harold was in his front yard trimming plants when the patrol vehicles pulled up. Agent Susan Danner read the arrest warrant and informed him of his right to remain silent and right to an attorney. Harold did not resist, only nodded and said, "I knew this was coming." He was handcuffed and placed in a police car in view of 2 neighbors who had no idea of his past. Local police completed a custody report, verified his health condition, and secured personal belongings. Harold was taken to the Ventura County Jail to await extradition. Within 48 hours, Kansas submitted a formal extradition request with all legal documents and the Topeka court order. On May 1, 2012, extradition was approved. Harold was turned over to a federal transport team consisting of 2 officers and a medical attendant due to his advanced age and frail health. A special flight departed Los Angeles for Topeka that day, landing at 5:40 p.m. at Forbes Field. Harold was taken directly to the Kansas Department of Corrections intake facility. During admission, KBI recorded, suspect Harold Weaver, born 1926, arrested in Oxnard, California, pursuant to Topeka court warrant, health stable. Cooperative throughout transport. That same day, the state prosecutor announced formal charges on the 2 counts listed above. The indictment stated, defendant Harold Weaver, on or about October 18, 1958, in Riverton, Kansas, caused the death of Lillian Weaver during an argument and intentionally concealed the victim's body by burying it in concrete on his business premises, in violation of KSA 21-3404 and KSA 21-3828. The confession, scene reports, physical evidence, and forensic analyses were attached as supporting evidence. On May 2, Harold appeared for arraignment to confirm identity and be informed of legal rights. He confirmed his identity and accepted court-appointed counsel. The preliminary hearing concluded quickly, with trial scheduled for the following quarter. Harold was transferred to the Kansas State Prison, awaiting formal trial. The case was officially labeled, Case Reopened 2012, State vs. Harold Weaver, closing the pursuit and extradition phase of a crime forgotten for over half a century. After Harold Weaver was safely extradited to Kansas and intake procedures completed, the Topeka Prosecutor's Office began trial preparation. On May 4, 2012, Chief Prosecutor Deborah Hensley was assigned lead responsibility. She and her legal team reviewed the entire file, including forensic reports, recorded confession, scene reconstruction, and KBI interrogation transcript. Every piece of evidence was numbered and organized chronologically for presentation to the jury. In the prosecution's summary, Hensley identified the core objective to prove that Harold Weaver, though without intent to kill, caused death through seriously reckless conduct and then intentionally concealed the body to obstruct investigation, thereby violating 2 Kansas criminal statutes. At the same time, the court appointed public defender Thomas R. Caldwell to represent the defendant. Caldwell had extensive experience with cold cases and was often assigned complex matters involving long time gaps and deceased witnesses. After reviewing the file, he filed a motion requesting reconsideration of Harold's health condition and asked the court to consider leniency based on age and the more than half-century delay since the incident. Caldwell argued that the defendant no longer poses a danger to society, lacks capacity for self-defense, and has lived the remainder of his life in remorse. Prosecutor Hensley countered that time cannot erase the consequences of a crime proven by physical evidence and a lawful confession. At the May 15 preliminary hearing, Topeka Court heard both sides. Judge Madsen denied the motion to dismiss charges, but granted medical monitoring for the defendant throughout proceedings. Trial was scheduled to begin in early July 2012 and expected to last 2 weeks. During preparation, the prosecution team reviewed witnesses. The two surviving witnesses, Rose Galvin and Frank Miles, were both deposed via video due to age and inability to travel. Both reaffirmed their prior KBI statements and consented to use of their images at trial. Additionally, the Topeka forensic team prepared to represent DNA results and cement analysis. The 3D warehouse reconstruction model created by KBI was refined for jury presentation, simulating the entire concreting process and body location beneath the floor. The state legal office requested court permission to use this technical model as visual evidence. Meanwhile, defense attorney Caldwell planned a strategy centered on 2 points. First, Harold Weaver had no intent to kill, and second, concealing the body was a panicked reaction rather than an attempt to evade justice. He requested re-evaluation of the forensic conclusion to determine whether the fall alone could have caused fatal injury. The court granted this, allowing an independent expert chosen by the defense to review the forensic file. On June 1, that expert concluded the injury was consistent with a heavy impact and could have occurred accidentally, but did not rule out pushing. The report was submitted to both sides. By mid-June, all evidence was sealed and cataloged for submission to court, 64 items, including original physical evidence, photographs, documents, recordings, and the 3D model. Prosecutor Hensley drafted a final 22-page indictment detailing the sequence of events, evidence, and legal basis for the charges. The indictment was approved by the judge on June 22, 2012. That same day, the court publicly announced the trial schedule, setting opening date for July 9, 2012, at Shawnee County District Court in Topeka. The case was coded State of Kansas v. Harold Weaver, CR 120174. In an internal report to KBI, Danner noted, "All data has been transferred to prosecution for courtroom presentation." The case enters the trial phase after more than 53 years of suspension. On the morning of July 9, 2012, the trial in the case of State of Kansas v. Harold Weaver officially opened at the Shawnee County District Court in Topeka. Courtroom 2 was packed with people, including prosecutors, defense counsel, KBI personnel, forensic experts, and a limited number of accredited local reporters. The jury consisted of 12 members selected from Shawnee County residents, most of whom had never heard of the old Riverton case. Judge Madsen presided, with prosecutor Deborah Hensley representing the state of Kansas and attorney Thomas Caldwell representing the defendant. When the trial began, Hensley opened with an overview of the case, recounting the investigation that had stretched more than half a century and asserting that the physical evidence combined with Harold Weaver's own confession had finally proven the full truth hidden since 1958. Following her opening statement, the prosecution proceeded to present its evidence in order. First came the DNA analysis report, introduced by Dr. Robert Klein, director of the Topeka Forensic Laboratory. He confirmed that bone fragments recovered from the concrete slab in Riverton matched the DNA of the victim's niece, Lillian Weaver, with 99.98% certainty, thereby establishing the victim's identity. He also described in detail the skull fracture, the direction of impact, and histological analysis, concluding that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the occipital region from a heavy object. The jury was shown enlarged photographs of the forensic results on a large screen and given an explanation of the DNA analysis process. Next, the prosecutor presented the physical evidence. The Bulova watch found inside the concrete block, 2 metal buttons, and a cement purchase receipt bearing the signature Weaver dated October 19, 1958. A KBI specialist presented an analysis of the cement composition, proving that the material used for the slab matched samples from Riverton Cement Company and that the quantity purchased was sufficient to cover the entire new floor area. After the physical exhibits, the prosecution played a 3D crime scene reconstruction video produced by the KBI that recreated the warehouse as it appeared in 1958, the position of the body, and the pouring of the concrete. The simulation left the courtroom in complete silence, especially when the model showed the body gradually being covered by concrete, exactly matching the 2012 excavation findings. When the video ended, Hensley introduced the final piece of evidence, the defendant's confession. She requested that the audio recording of the interrogation conducted in Oxnard, California, be played. On the tape, Harold Weaver's trembling voice recounted the entire incident, the argument, the fall, and how, in panic, he poured cement over his wife's body. The jury listened in silence. Many lowered their heads when they heard the words, "I laid her on her side and poured the concrete over her." After the recording finished, the prosecution declared, "This was a voluntary confession that matches every piece of scientific evidence." The prosecution then played video-recorded statements from the 2 surviving witnesses, Rose Galvin and Frank Miles, recorded in Wichita. Rose described hearing metallic noises and smelling fresh cement from the direction of the warehouse that night, while Miles recounted seeing Harold dragging something that looked like a large sack toward the back of the property. Both statements were shown in court and authenticated by the witnesses' signatures. Hensley concluded her presentation with a single sentence, "Every piece of evidence, physical, testimonial, and the defendant's own words, tells one and the same story." On the second day, the trial moved to the forensic cross-examination phase. Defense attorney Caldwell argued that the death could have been accidental, not intentional violence. He called Dr. Morgan Reeves, an independent forensic pathologist, as an expert witness. Reeves testified that the injury could have occurred if the victim had fallen backward and struck her head on a hard surface. However, when the prosecutor asked whether burying a body in concrete could be considered normal behavior for an innocent person, Dr. Reeves answered, "From a scientific standpoint, no." That response left the courtroom silent. Hensley countered by pointing out that concealing the body, burning personal items, and fleeing the state immediately afterward clearly demonstrated consciousness of guilt. In his defense, Caldwell appealed for mercy, emphasizing the defendant's advanced age and frail health, arguing that this was a family tragedy, not a premeditated murder. When given permission to speak, Harold Weaver addressed the court briefly. "I can't go back and change anything. I just know I was wrong." After 4 days of trial, all evidence and testimony had been presented. Judge Madsen handed the case to the 12-member jury. They deliberated in private for 6 straight hours. The court's summary sheet listed the key questions: whether the defendant had caused Lillian Weaver's death through reckless conduct, and whether he had intentionally concealed the body. In the late afternoon of July 13, 2012, the jury returned to the courtroom. The 4 persons stood and delivered the verdict. The judge called for order as the verdict was read. Result: Harold Weaver was found guilty on both counts, involuntary manslaughter and concealment of a body. The courtroom fell completely silent when the verdict was announced. Judge Madsen thanked the jury for their careful work and adjourned the sentencing portion to a later hearing to allow both sides to prepare penalty recommendation. As he was led out, Harold walked slowly, head bowed, hands trembling on his cane. The 4-day trial concluded, and after more than half a century, the Riverton disappearance was officially determined by a Kansas court to be a case of involuntary manslaughter with intentional concealment of the body. On the morning of July 20, 2012, 1 week after the jury found Harold Weaver guilty, the Shawnee County District Court held the formal sentencing hearing. The courtroom was quieter this time, with far fewer spectators than during the trial. Harold was wheeled in, his face gaunt, hands shaking slightly. Before pronouncing sentence, Judge Theodore Madsen allowed final statements from both the prosecution and defense. Prosecutor Deborah Hensley spoke briefly, stressing that more than half a century cannot erase legal responsibility for taking a life and hiding the truth. She requested the maximum sentence within the guideline range for involuntary manslaughter, 10 years, plus 2 additional years for concealment of a body, but asked the court to consider concurrent sentencing due to the defendant's age and health. Defense attorney Thomas Caldwell did not contest the guilty verdict, but asked for leniency, noting that his client had confessed fully, cooperated completely, and at his age posed no further danger to society. He said, "The worst punishment he has already endured is not today's sentence, but 54 years lived with guilt and torment." After hearing both sides, Judge Madsen delivered the court's findings. He reviewed the entire investigation, emphasizing the importance of restoring justice to a victim forgotten for decades. The court finds that the defendant's actions, though not premeditated, demonstrated disregard for human life and the law. Concealing the body was a deliberate act to evade responsibility. The judge paused, then pronounced the formal sentence. Harold Weaver is sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for the crimes of involuntary manslaughter and concealment of a body, to be served in a Kansas State Correctional Facility. Time already served in custody and during extradition will be credited against the sentence. The courtroom was absolutely silent as he read the final line. Case hash 58-174. Solved after 54 years. Harold nodded slightly and said nothing. When permitted a final statement, he said only, "I stayed silent too long. If I could go back, I would do things differently." Judge Madsen replied, "Justice may come late, but it still comes." The sentence was signed that same day, with copies sent to the KBI, the state prosecutor's office, and the judicial archives. Harold was returned to the Kansas State prison system under special medical supervision. Local newspapers ran short articles summarizing that the 1958 Riverton disappearance has been resolved after 54 years. The husband has been sentenced to 10 years in prison. The case file was officially closed, marked in the KBI system with the notation, case hash 58-174. Solved after 54 years. All documents, physical evidence, and the 3D reconstruction model were sealed and archived at the Central Storage Facility in Wichita. In the archive catalog, the case was classified under Cold Case Resolved, becoming one of the longest investigated cases in the agency's history. With sentencing concluded, Judge Madsen struck the gavel and declared the proceedings closed, ending the more than half-century investigative journey of the Lillian Weaver disappearance. A case once forgotten but finally brought to light. Following the conclusion of the sentencing hearing and the finalization of the judgment, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation immediately initiated the formal case closure process required for resolved cold cases and submitted it to the Kansas Department of Justice. On July 30, 2012, the KBI director approved the comprehensive final report of more than 100 pages, authored primarily by lead investigator Susan Danner, titled Case Hash 58-174, Final Report. The Lillian Weaver Investigation. The report opened with an overview clearly stating the timeline of the crime, the agencies involved, and the significance of solving a case dormant for over half a century. Danner detailed the entire investigative process in 3 phases. The initial 1958 phase marred by procedural errors and evidence collection failures. The 2012 reactivation triggered by forensic discoveries, and the prosecution and trial phase that concluded with a Kansas state court conviction. The first section described in detail the past investigative failures that directly caused the case to remain unsolved for decades. Danner listed 5 specific shortcomings: failure to collect samples at the scene, failure to test ash and soil, failure to examine material purchase receipts, failure to monitor the suspect during the critical first 48 hours, and failure to elevate the file to state level. The report stated that had any one of these steps been properly executed, the case likely would have been solved in the 1960s. The second section explained how modern forensic technology completely transformed the investigation. Through nuclear DNA analysis, radiometric dating of the cement, and 3D crime scene reconstruction, investigators were able to accurately recreate the 1958 crime. Danner wrote, "When science becomes strong enough to fill the gaps left by human failure, justice finally finds its way back." The report also highlighted interagency cooperation involving the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office, the Topeka Forensic Lab, the Kansas State Prosecutor, and the Oxnard, California Police Department, all of which participated in extradition and trial proceedings. In the detailed chronology, Danner reconstructed the entire 2012 investigation from the initial construction discovery through excavation, analysis, witness location, and suspect interrogation. She emphasized that the case's success lay not only in the conviction, but in proving that justice could be recovered from a file that seemed forever buried. The third section addressed legal analysis and broader societal impact. Danner incorporated assessments from prosecutor Deborah Hensley and Judge Theodore Madsen, both agreeing that the Lillian Weaver case exemplified the progress of the criminal justice system when traditional investigative methods are combined with modern technology. The report stated, "File #58174 demonstrates the value of systematic record preservation. Every page and photograph that once seemed useless ultimately became the foundation for rediscovering the truth." Nearly one-third of the report consisted of recommendations for procedural improvements. Danner and the KBI advisory team urged the Kansas Department of Justice to issue new guidelines for local law enforcement handling missing persons cases. Recommendations included mandatory collection of physical samples at every scene, preservation of soil and construction materials for at least 50 years, automatic escalation of unsolved missing persons cases after 12 months to state-level centralized storage, creation of a unified evidence database, and expanded NAMUS access for all county-level agencies. Additionally, the KBI recommended establishing a permanent cold case review board that would conduct annual reviews of dormant cases, chaired by a state-level investigator, to prevent repeats of the 1958 Riverton oversight. The report also addressed the human element. Many witnesses had died, physical evidence was nearly destroyed, yet memory and documentation were sufficient to link past and present. In the conclusion, Danner wrote, "The Lillian Weaver case is a reminder that time can erase nearly everything except the truth." She thanked the forensic team, technical specialists, and Riverton residents who provided information, especially the last two surviving witnesses, Rose Galvin and Frank Miles, who had seen that evening in 1958. The report ended with post-closure statistics, 6 months of investigation, 8 agencies involved, 11 technical experts, and more than 200 legal documents. Official copies were sent to the Kansas Department of Justice and the governor, with one archived at the KBI Central Facility in Wichita and another in the Topeka KBI Records Room, bearing the notation, Case #58174. Solved after 54 years, Riverton, Kansas. When the file was officially sealed, Danner wrote the final entry in her duty log, "Justice is never lost. It is only temporarily buried. Our job is to find it, no matter how long it takes." The report was approved by the Kansas Department of Justice on August 10, 2012, formally closing the entire legal process. In the KBI database, the Lillian Weaver case was marked with its final status, closed, solved. Remaining physical evidence was permanently sealed in storage. Under the bright lights of the Topeka Archive Room, the old file labeled 58174 now rests quietly on its metal shelf, concluding a 54-year journey in which the mistakes of the past were corrected by science and the persistence of investigators, restoring justice to its rightful place. The Lillian Weaver case, solved after more than half a century thanks to modern forensic science and the perseverance of investigators like Susan Danner, stands as a powerful reminder of the value of accountability, justice, and collective memory in today's American society. The story began with a small oversight in 1958. Local Riverton police failed to collect cement samples, check purchase receipts, or monitor suspect Harold Weaver, seemingly minor procedural errors that left a woman buried in silence for 54 years. Only when construction workers uncovered the old concrete slab was justice reawakened through DNA technology and 3D modeling. In contemporary American life, this reflects the critical importance of precision, transparency, and professional responsibility, not just in criminal investigation, but in every field, from journalism and medicine to public administration. A careless act or hasty decision today can create consequences that take half a century to rectify. At the same time, Susan Danner's journey demonstrates the power of belief in the truth. She did not merely find evidence, she corrected the mistakes of an entire previous generation. In a modern American society, where technology advances rapidly, yet truth is easily obscured by misinformation, that meticulous and steadfast attitude is something every individual should maintain. Finally, Harold Weaver's story, the man who hid his guilt for a lifetime only to confess at age 86, reminds us that time cannot erase the consequences of deception. Justice in America may arrive late, but it still arrives. The lesson for each of us is clear: live honestly and face mistakes as early as possible, because prolonged silence only makes the price of truth heavier. If you believe that justice, even when it comes late, is still worth pursuing, please subscribe so we can continue exploring forgotten cases that are never truly over together. Thank you for following Lillian Weaver's journey. See you in the next video, where the truth will once again be brought to light.